been conducting very unusual surveys of 4 major racial and ethnic communities of Los Angeles County: African Americans, Asian American and Pacific Islanders, Latinos, and Jewish residents of the county. And this year, we're very excited to have 2 polls that we are putting out in the month of March, today and March 15th. Today's is the Latino survey, and the AAPI survey will be released on March 15th. Together, these 2 communities represent almost 2/3 of the population of Los Angeles County, and anywhere between 1/3 to 40% of the electorate. And yet there is very often not sufficient in-depth surveying to really give us a sense of the worlds that these communities inhabit and how they affect the larger political and social environment. And we're very excited to be able to bring this to you today. And we are bringing it to you with the support of our great friends and colleagues at the California Community Foundation. And to say a few words of welcome, I'd like to introduce Efrain Escobedo, the Vice President of Public Policy and Civic Engagement of the California Community Foundation, with whom we have worked very closely on all this sort of community surveying for quite some number of years. Welcome, Efrain.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Rafe. Thank you for the invitation and for the amazing work. It's great to have an opportunity to come together with so many brilliant people across our region. And California Community Foundation has been proud to partner with you, Rafe, and the amazing team at Pat Brown Institute, and also just the great institutional leaders at Cal State LA. I think our work together, both in not just really surveying, but we see it as giving voice to community in a way that provides quantitative information that gives fewer and fewer excuses as to what are the needs of community, what is it that community really aspires to, is really important, right? And so we've seen the power of just giving community voice through data, and it's created some really important change, first and foremost, as we worked around the census, but also in regions across LA County, like Southeast LA. So we're proud to continue that work now as we look at how our community's voices continue on into our own democracy. There's a lot of talk and a lot of great work, more importantly, happening around building a strong multiracial democracy, not just in California, but I think LA is really the progenitor of that. And these surveys really are a great example of where that work begins. What are the voices that need to be included in building that work? So we're very excited to be able to be part of the great work that you're leading at the center, Rafe, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Efrain. Thank you very much. And we look forward to years and years of this exciting work. Unearthing voices to strengthen local democracy is really what we are doing. And now I want to introduce Matt Barreto, but first give you a sense of the roadmap for today. Matt has been leading these surveys, and he is going to present the survey results. And then we're going to have a panel of 3 people that I will moderate. You'll be able to put questions in the Q&A. The chat is only enabled for the panelists. You can put things in there. But as to Q&A, we'd love to hear your thoughts, and we will work that in. Matt Barreto is the president and founding partner of BSP Research and professor of political science in Chicano and Central American Studies at UCLA. You've all heard of the Research Center Latino Policy and Politics Initiative, which has made a gigantic impact in this region, and he's the founder of that. He's a well-known scholar of political science. His work I've read for years, but also one of the leading survey specialists in the entire United States, and we're delighted to have him here. Matt, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your presentation.
All right, great. Thanks, Rafe. It's great to be with you all today to share some findings of our new survey that you heard Efrain and Rafe speak about. I'm going to go ahead and start my screen share and get to the program. All right, let me minimize this so I can see you all. All right, so we conducted this poll as part of the Voices of LA series, as Rafe noted. You can follow along if there's anything interesting that you see here today. If you want to share that, please do tag at PBI and hashtag Voices of LA to share these findings with our fellow Angelenos. So a little bit about this survey in particular. As Rafe noted, we'll also be releasing a AAPI survey in the coming weeks. Today, we're talking about the Latino survey. Was 1,500 Latinos interviewed across Los Angeles County. This was conducted in November to December of 2021 and was done in English or Spanish at the preference of respondents. 70% of the sample came from online sources and 30% from phone. All respondents were randomly selected. They had the choice of answering in English or Spanish, and we used live interviewers for the telephone portion. We contacted online self-completed participants through text message, email, through apps, and through online panels. On this project was implemented by myself as well as Anais Lopez, an analyst at BSP Research, and we're both happy to take any of your questions about methodology or elsewhere. But let me get on to what the findings are. We want to group these into three key findings. The survey, of course, delved into a lot of information. As with most public opinion polls, there's a lot of ground to cover, but we want to try to isolate on what we think the three key themes are. The first is the impact of COVID-19 continues into the second year to take major tolls on the Latino community. We've seen this in other work that we've done collectively with the Pat Brown Institute, looking at certain regions of Los Angeles. We've seen this in other polling that Anais and I have overseen during the COVID pandemic. Latinos are a hard hit community. It's not behind us. Serious economic and health consequences remain. Almost half of Latinos in the LA County region had either lost their job or had their hours cut, major financial impacts. And right now, about half of all Latino households say they have $500 or less saved as a result of the financial toll. The second theme that we want to emphasize is discrimination, race, and hate issues that are sadly continuing, not just in California, but across the nation, and how Latinos are reacting to that. 80% of Latinos in our sample said that anti-Latino racism is currently a problem. 62% said there's a lot of discrimination against immigrants. This is a group that we have seen, not just in the Latino community, but across the board, face the brunt. And half of our samples say that they at some time have personally experienced discrimination. So this remains an issue and something that we must confront in order to have a united Los Angeles County. The last thing that we want to emphasize is voting and civic engagement. Of course, we have elections around the corner for all levels of office. And we found that Latinos in our survey are quite engaged. They, despite the limitations that COVID-19 have put on some gatherings, are involved in writing letters to public officials, attending protests, attending demonstrations, but also registering, voting, and having political conversations in both real life and also in social media. Friends and family are a key influence in the Latino community, as is our ethnicity and shared commonality. We find strong support for these theories that Latinos feel united, they feel common bonds. And to that extent, a high percentage, 80%, say it's important to have Latina and Latino representatives represent them in public office. And of course, we have numerous high-profile Latino representatives here in Los Angeles area. Finally, those, connecting it to the last bullet point, those who experience discrimination or who saw discrimination, they're substantially more likely to be civically engaged and getting involved in politics, something we have seen, a trend we have seen really since the Prop 187 days here in Southern California. So let me start by reviewing some of the findings on COVID-19. It was rated as the top issue in terms of important issues facing the region. People could name up to 3 issues as their most important issue, and tackling the coronavirus pandemic is number 1. You see it outpaces a local issue of homelessness, certainly a top issue. Jobs in the economy and healthcare continue to be issues of importance in the Latino community as well. But getting on top of and tackling the COVID pandemic has been the number 1 issue in every poll we've conducted since COVID has become an issue in March of 2020. Similar to the data and statistics you can find on the adult population by race and ethnicity here in Los Angeles, 85% of our Latino respondents say that they have been vaccinated against the COVID vaccine. We know that there was a particularly strong increase over the second half of the last year. In the last quarter of the last year, sharp increase in Latino vaccination rates, and have now come close to the overall LA County average. Again, this is data among just adults, only 18 and over were in our survey. Among those 15% who have not been vaccinated, about half say that they're going to get vaccinated, waiting to see and are ready to get vaccinated. But the other half are a bit more hesitant. They're going to wait to see if it's a requirement. And about a third of those 15%, so maybe only about 5% overall, say that they aren't going to get vaccinated. The COVID pandemic has had a very high impact on job and economic disruption among Latinos. And I want to start you out by looking at the chart on the left side of the screen. Both of these we have broken out by educational attainment, which is a major class indicator here in Los Angeles. And overall, 47% say they either lost a job or had hours cut, and 52% say they did not. It's actually quite consistent across degree of education, less than high school, some college, or a college degree, all at about a 50-50 break on did not have a severe economic impact or had some job loss and hours cut. However, on the right side of your screen, you see a very significant divide in whether or not Latinos were able to work from home, either full-time or part-time, or if they had to go into the office and work in person. Among those without a high school degree, only 13% said yes all the time. 3 times higher among those with a college degree, 39%. And an additional 32% said some of the time. So 70% of those with a college degree were able to have some amount of remote work, where the exact opposite. 71% of those without a high school degree were not. They were on the front lines, they were essential workers, they were out working from the start of this pandemic, if they were lucky enough to keep their job. As a result of this, as a result of both the job loss and hours cut and the type of working conditions, we found that 75% of Latinos said that the government should continue to provide some amount of stimulus, rent relief, eviction protection, programs to protect people. 31% said it should increase, it should be even more, and 44% said it should continue. This is something that is well needed and goes a long way in the Latino community. To that point, we find that only half of Latinos have $500 or less saved. If you add those first two categories, we said, how much do you currently have in savings or saved up for emergencies? The most common answer was less than $100. This is a community living paycheck to paycheck, with another 21% saying 100 to 500. That's half of our entire sample. This was a consistent finding. We've asked this question multiple times throughout the COVID pandemic, and about half of the sample is in this lower bucket of only having about 500 or less to draw on. On the other end, you only see about 1 in 5. About 20% of Latinos have over $3,000. That might be the amount that you need just to get by 1 month in terms of rent, food, and utilities. So this continues to be a community that is hurting, that does need relief and does need support because of the COVID pandemic. We asked people how they were able to cope and work during the COVID pandemic. And we asked people if they had enough electronics for everyone in the house. Did they have the right kind of electronics? And do they have good internet access? Overall, about 70% or more of Latinos said yes. But you can see that there are people in that category saying no, and that it is much more prevalent in the foreign-born population, including 30% of foreign-born respondents here in Los Angeles who said they did not have regular home internet access during the pandemic. And over a third, 38 to 39%, said that they did not have enough electronics for everyone or the necessary electronics. This included if you had to work from home, if your kids had to do school from home. We know that there is incredible inequities and that the digital divide continues, and this is some strong evidence of that. However, despite these limitations, Latinos do have hope for a better economic future. We asked people looking forward, do you think your situation will get better or worse? 86% say somewhat or a lot better. And this is across different income brackets. If you're in a lower, medium, or higher bracket, the Latino community is hopeful and is thinking that their economic situation is going to get better moving forward. The second theme that we wanted to focus on was issues related to race and discrimination. We start out with just a very simple slide of self-identification. We've always asked this question at the start of our survey. And then we use in communicating with our Latino respondents, we use the topic, the phrase that they prefer. We ask them, do you prefer to use Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, something else, or no preference? And consistent with past surveys, by about a 2-to-1 margin, Hispanic continues to be the preferred term, with Latino at about 29%. When we ask people very directly if they're okay with either term, overwhelmingly respondents tell us that either word, Hispanic or Latino, is fine for describing them. We asked people if anti-Latino racism is a problem today, and 80% combined said either it is somewhat or an extremely serious problem. And for 38%, it's a large chunk of our community, they say that it is an extremely serious problem. Who do they think is receiving the most discrimination today? Well, the bars in dark green are the groups that are facing some or a lot of discrimination. We asked Latino perceptions of different racial and ethnic groups here in Los Angeles. You can see that immigrants, Latinos tell us, are facing the most discrimination in the US today. It's 62%, a lot, 19%, some. Latinos also recognize that African Americans continue to face a lot of discrimination, rating them at about the same rate as within our own community, 51%, 49%, and slightly less for Asian Americans. Perhaps there's less awareness. More people find themselves in that some or a little category when understanding the Asian American experience among Latino respondents. Where is this happening, and what setting is this discrimination taking place? Well, we ask people about in the public sector, such as public transportation. Is it at school? Is it at a grocery store or restaurant? Or is it in your workplace or somewhere else? And you can see that people are saying yes overall in those indicators. This is amongst our sample. Remember, half of our sample said they have personally experienced discrimination. And among those people who have personally experienced it, they're telling us where. Among younger folks, it's more likely to be in the school setting. That was the most common answer. Amongst middle-aged folks who are in the workplace, it's not surprising that was the most common place where they are experiencing discrimination. But there are multiple sectors where our respondents told us they may have experienced discrimination. The final issue within this bucket has to do with views towards police funding, currently a hot topic nationally, but also here in Los Angeles. We asked people, do you think spending on police funding should be increased, decreased, or kept the same? And overall, you see 34% think it should be increased. Those are the two bars in blue at the top, increased a lot or increased some. 22% think that it should be decreased. Those are the red bars at the bottom. But the most common answer was that it should be kept the same, 44%. We break this out across different age demographics or educational demographics. And we see even among younger people, there is slightly more support for decreasing police funding at 32%, but it's not the runaway answer. The most common answer across any age or educational category is that it should probably be kept about the same. The last section that I want to talk to you about is voting and civic engagement. The first thing that I always like to point out to every audience is that this is a bilingual, bicultural community. We ask people when it comes to news and information about current affairs. So here we're cueing them to think about news, not just entertainments and sports. You primarily rely on English, Spanish, or both. And again, we have a very common distribution here in the pie chart on the left. About a third in English, a little over a quarter in Spanish, but the largest answer says both equally. And we know that this is true from asking media sources, that Latinos in Los Angeles are quite bicultural. They're engaging both English and Spanish. And when we break it out by key demographics, we see that both category is quite common. While we do see differences, younger Latinos, much more likely to be US born and English dominant, do tell us at a higher rate, 39% English, but 45% both. Same thing with older Latinos and foreign-born Latinos. They are more likely to say Spanish, but very high rates of also saying they engage both. And you see the same thing by education. It's not the case that once you have a college degree, you stop engaging in Spanish language media. In fact, 45% say they use both equally. Influences on politics, a quite interesting question. We asked a variety of different indicators. Here's just a couple of things that might influence the way you view politics in your life, the most common answer, the highest supporting answer was your family. 67% are in the three most influential categories, with 24% saying the most influence comes from their family. And you see the next highest is over on the right side of the screen is your ethnicity. We asked people, how does being Latino impact the way you view politics? And for 60%, they say it does. They say it impacts them in the way that they view politics. Religion, you see there, which Latinos are a quite religious group, by some metrics have the highest rates of church attendance and religiosity. But a consistent finding is that it does not dominate the way Latinos view politics, even though it does influence their daily life. Which of the following have you done? I said there's been a reasonably high degree of civic engagement. This is just a simple yes, no. Have you done this either in person or online over the past 2 years? What jumps away at me here is that bar about 2/3 of the way down. Talk to my friends and family about a government issue. And this is 59% of Latinos say they're doing this. They're engaging with their family, with their friends about political discussion, about political issues. And this has become a dominant way. Now, perhaps many of us have been stuck talking to friends and family a lot over the last 2 years. And we know we just came through a contentious election in 2020. But Latinos are having these political discussions, and friends and family are an important influence. When it comes to politics, Latinos in Los Angeles, not surprisingly, are Democratic, as demonstrated by the blue bars there, and the overall total sample is at the bottom of your screen. But they're not necessarily liberal. This is something that folks who have been following the Latino community for a long time recognize, is that gray bar in the middle, moderate, is the largest, far and away. That while 54% of Latinos identify themselves as Democrats, only 25% identify themselves as liberals. You can see this is a trend across age categories, men and women. We see a very consistent grouping here, that while there are not lots of Latinos in Los Angeles who describe themselves as Republicans, there are a lot that do describe themselves as independent, and there are a lot that do describe themselves as moderates. Former President Trump continues to have low favorability ratings amongst Latinos here in Los Angeles, only 20% favorable to 57% unfavorable. Only among self-identifying Hispanic Republicans. There at the bottom of your screen, does he have majority support? Amongst those who say independent or neither, this is a very large category, as you saw in the previous chart. In fact, he has lower approval rating even among self-identified Democrats. Democratic politicians receive generally positive ratings in Los Angeles. President Biden at +23, Governor Newsom at +18, and Mayor Garcetti at +21. But you do see that gray category in the middle of neither approve nor disapprove or have no opinion is large. And there are a number of people who are open to hearing more information and open to persuasion. When it comes to how Latinos view government, I like to describe Latinos as sort of in the middle. You see, the most common answer when we gave people, they could say they trust government always, most of the time, only some of the time, or never. The most common answer is that very light green bar of some of the time. And you have almost an equal number in the dark green and the red, the always and never. And so what that means is that there are a lot of Latinos in the middle who are still evaluating government, evaluating services, and trying to decide whether it's local government or the federal government. How much of the time do they trust? And the modal answer, the common answer, is just some of the time. The most trusted messengers, as well as service providers that we found, teacher, school, and staff, this has commonly been the #1 trusted resource within the Latino community, continues to be very highly trusted. What we saw during the COVID pandemic is that Latino doctors and Latina nurses, healthcare professionals who are Latina and Latino, have increased in salience and trust. And that continues to be the case today. They are the most trusted source right now at 41% always and 38% most of the time. That's incredibly strong, 79%. These are folks that we should be getting involved in lots of areas of civic engagement, not just for healthcare decisions, because it's who our community is looking to. Finally, a little bit about what I mentioned earlier, which was themes of Latino unity. We asked people whether or not Hispanic or Latinos share fundamental interests that unite us or not. 59% strongly agree with that, with 35% somewhat. So while there are diversity in ideology, policy issues, Latinos in Los Angeles do feel that they have common bonds and that they share commonality. Related to this, Latino representation is seen as important. 46% saying very important and 36 somewhat. That's 82% combined who thinks it is important that Hispanic or Latino person represents you in public office. Further, when we ask people about outreach campaigns, 4 in 10, a non-trivial number, say that they are more likely to listen if your outreach is from another Hispanic or Latino doing that outreach. And so in some cases, if you're not doing that sort of bicultural, sensitive outreach to the community, they may not even be listening. They may not perceive that outreach as being relevant to them. All right, that's the last bit of data. As I said, there's more in the overall survey that we can talk about, but I'm excited about the panel discussion. Rafe, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Turn my screen share off and just listen in now.
Thank you very much, Matt. That was really well done, really informative. I'd like to ask our 3 panelists to put their cameras on, and Efrain, I'd like you to put your camera on as well if you're available to join us, and remind everybody that we have a Q&A function. I'm going to be having a conversation with our panelists, and we will intersperse some questions from our very attentive audience if we can. Let me introduce our 3 guests, and then we're going to jump right in. We have Antonia Hernandez, who is, of course, known to all of you, President and Chief Executive Officer of the California Community Foundation, one of the great leaders of Southern California and all of the movements that have made a difference in this community as this community has transformed. And we've worked with her on many projects here at PBI. Angelica Salas, also a great leader of our community in Los Angeles, the Executive Director of CHIRLA. We always like to call it CHIRLA. It's just such a great sounding name, but the full name is the Coalition for Humane Immigration Rights, and a truly important leader throughout the community. Jean Guerrero, who's a columnist, an opinion columnist for the LA Times. I've really been enjoying reading your stuff, Jean. I'm becoming a fan. And she's the author of a book called Hate Monger, Stephen Miller, Donald Trump and the White Nationalist Agenda. But she's been featured in journals and magazines and newspapers throughout the country, and we get to read her all the time at the Los Angeles Times. So welcome to all of you. And I'm going to jump right in, and this is going to be conversational. I want to ask each of you, with all that you already know, what surprised you or struck you, the single thing that struck you the most about this data and information that Matt Barreto presented with us? Antonia, was there anything that jumped out at you as really, really important?
Actually, what jumped out at me is the survey itself, because I've seen hundreds of surveys, and the ability to capture the subtleties of our community. Like, for instance, in the area of, yes, leaning Democrat, but being moderate. Mm-hmm. The issue of discrimination and the differences and the burden of, the immigrant community, which we know, that they have the onus. And I think, that what more disappointed me is it validated how fragile the economic well-being of the Latino community is. I mean, we know it, but the depth of it really surprised and disappointed me.
Thank you. Angelica, what about you?
Well, first of all, I also want to say thank you, because it is so important to see the voices, the opinions of the Latino, Latina, Latinx community. I think that's really important, and we need more of these surveys. The thing that really struck me was the high levels of discrimination that people are facing, and the report that it's really from all of the people who were surveyed. Consistently, they're all saying we have experienced it. This is something that has happened to me, and also how they experience it in the workplace. And I think that also connects very much with the economics that we saw. It is disturbing, disappointing, unjust, the injustice around the low wages that our community is facing, that they can't, the most, can say we don't have $500 in savings. And we saw that actually when during the height of the pandemic, when we were trying to get the disaster relief program out, which was about $500 to the undocumented population. We actually also conducted a survey with a lot of our partners, and we actually connected with over 91,000 individuals who actually returned their survey, who were receiving this this assistance. Of course, they were undocumented immigrants. And one of the things that, number one, the women. I think it's important for us to note that a lot of the people who are suffering economically and discrimination are a lot of the women. And why they needed the money was they needed it for basic things, food, first housing, then food. And then when you ask them what happened, what happened that you needed this money, because somebody in their home was sick with COVID, they had to take care of them. And number two, it was because they had to actually leave work because they had to be with their kids who are now on online school. So those things just were re-emphasized for me in looking at this survey.
Very interesting. So Jean, you in a sense have a couple of audiences when you write. I think you write for communities that you write about, but you also inform the rest of us about the nature of communities. What do you think Los Angeles needs to know from this survey that people don't know now about the Latino community in Los Angeles?
Well, I agree very much with what Antonia and Angelica were saying. The precariousness of this community in Los Angeles is not a surprise, but it's very striking what the survey shows. And I think that we really need to reckon with the amount of discrimination that Latinos, even in a city like Los Angeles, which is perceived to be one of the, safest, most welcoming cities, politically, at least for Latinos, it still continues to have, these levels of discrimination. As far as what was most surprising for me when I was looking at the survey, I would say just seeing that 86% of Latinos have hope about the future. That to me is really heartening. It's very hopeful. I was surprised to see it just because, we've had the Trump administration, we had the pandemic. It's just been one trauma after another, and you would expect this community, especially to have a level of fatigue. But the hope is still there, and so I think that just makes the responsibility of community leaders all the more. It just makes it all the more serious and important.
Could we talk about hope a little bit? I think that's just a startling contrast when you see the data going where it's going economically. And Angelica, what's this hope all about? What's the meaning of this word hope for this community that pops out in the middle of all the distress?
I see it all the time. I feel that one of the things that keeps a lot of us working in the middle of maybe not seeing the results we want at the federal level, certainly on immigration, sometimes at the local level in advancing our work, is that you just see a community that is willing to sacrifice so that future generations can have better opportunities than they did. And so whether it's new, immigrants who are coming into Los Angeles, who are hopeful that the education system will provide for their children an opportunity not to work in low wage paying jobs as construction workers, as domestic workers, janitors, but that they will be those professionals, that they will be the individuals who will get the college degree finally, even if their parents had very little education. And so this idea of sacrifice today, struggle today, so that in the future, our children and their children would have a better life, I think is what sustains a community that is very much, once again, discriminated against, not given the protection they need, not paid the wages that they deserved, and many times not represented the way they should in government. And so, but that people, the other thing that I think is important in this survey is how people are willing to be active in different ways, right? In different ways that people are willing to be active, discuss these issues with the family in order to change the reality that they currently live.
Antonia, hope.
Well, you know, the interesting thing about this survey for me is we're a very communal community. And you know, religion is important to us. Extended family is important to us. And being an immigrant and growing up, sort of surrounded by a support system, both familial and friends. It's the ability to count on a group of individuals to support you. Some of them is, you might be poor economically, but you're rich in the structure that you have surrounding you. And that's the interesting thing, because this issue of optimism has consistently come up in the Latino community. As Angelica indicated, we are a very, we're a community that sacrifices. My parents would say, you don't want to work and I was a migrant worker. You don't want to work like us, like burros, like donkeys. You got to work with your brain. Therefore, you got to go to school. And all of the sacrifices that they made was for all of us. So it's, as Angelica said, you're sacrificing for the future. I mean, the problem though is, one of the other findings is the lack of connectivity. And the barrier that the lack of connectivity has, because whether it's children in school, whether it's, we talk about the new advanced telemedicine. Well, that's wonderful if you could, if you have connectivity. And if you think about someone earning minimum wage, how are they going to afford, the fees charged by the companies, the wireless companies? So I think relying on folks is a way, it's a psychological mechanism. I mean, what's the alternative? To have no hope, to be dirt poor, no hope? Where do you go from there? So I think, for me, it's something that has served us very well, notwithstanding all of the barriers that we have encountered as a community.
Ephraim, when we studied Southeast LA with surveys that Matt Barreto did with us, we found that same startling hope, didn't we?
That's right, Rafe. And I think that's a great example. And I just want to point out to the observation shared, particularly Angelica's point, of the two pieces, right? One is the hope, and as Antonia mentioned, the willingness to get engaged is when you're trying to advance equity, to create changes in your community, you got to believe that the change could happen. And then the voices of those being most affected by what's not there needs to be at the forefront. And with your reference of Southeast LA, the surveys help to, one, show and bring the voices of the most affected to the forefront, and then the willingness to engage of community leaders in the region to make that change sort of came to be. And what we saw was the product of vaccine rates turning around, and we saw them in Matt's survey at 85%. So I think it's both hope, but also the willingness to, as Antonia mentioned, to fight for something better, to make the change that's better for your family. That's really like this just amazing part of the story and resiliency that we found in this survey and the past one that you referenced.
Gene, I want to talk to you about politics a little bit, because you're a paper that's covering these elections that are in the city and the county. And somebody you might know, Alejandra Reyes Velarde from your paper, is asking a question I want to know. There's all these mayoral candidates, there's candidates for sheriff, there's candidates for school board. A lot of the conversation seems to be about something called the Latino vote, like it's a single thing. What advice would you give them from this survey about how they can reach and win support in a positive and productive way from these communities?
Well, advice to who? I'm sorry, I missed the
To the
part.
candidates, if a candidates came to you, not that they're going to come, put you in an awkward position as a journalist, but what do they need to know that could be useful from this survey?
from this survey, I mean, well, to begin with, obviously, just accepting the fact that Latinos are not a monolith is like, number one, and being able to engage and be physically present in these communities and listening to their needs is number one. One of the quick things that I wanted to mention, though, is just quickly on the topic of hope. One of the things that Matt Barreto pointed out was that there's this overwhelming trust in doctors and teachers among Latinos. And I thought that, just on the subject of hope, I just thought that that was very surprising. And he mentioned how important it might be to use, to harness this community for messages that are not necessarily tied to, health or school, but broadening that out and being able to really harness that to its maximum potential. And I just think that that's worth highlighting. But yeah, I mean, appealing to the Latino communities, it's just, I don't think that we can rely exclusively on this whole like anti-Trump, like the Republicans are coming after you and you should vote for us because we're not Republican. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we see low political engagement, is that's just not enough for Latino communities. Latinos have been let down again and again by politicians of both parties, have been demonized as a community by politicians of both parties. And this low political engagement is a reflection of just overall skepticism and political disillusionment. And so I think when we look at the survey, that like how can we actually reverse that situation of disillusionment and skepticism in our politicians, in politics, in democracy. And I think some of the answers are in the findings of the survey, in engaging with trusted messengers like those in the medical community that Latinos overwhelmingly respect, those in educational institutions. So I don't think there's like an easy answer that I can wrap up in a neat bow, but I think there's currently too much reliance on this, like, okay, we're going to make Trump the bad guy, the boogeyman. And of course, he has done horrible things to Latinos and demonized them and targeted them systematically. But the Democratic politicians, liberal politicians have to show that they are actually delivering results for this community in a way that they have not shown consistently across the board.
Angelica, I see you nodding and Antonia nodding. So
Yeah, so ditto to what Jean said, completely agree. I would add a couple of more things there. Number one is that Latino voters are sophisticated voters. Latino voters basically, again, they will listen to messages in English and Spanish, so they are paying attention as candidates are making their pitch to be elected for whatever the positions. And Latino voters want to see results, and they also want to see commitments for the changes that they see and that their family needs. And so I think that that's the other thing, that these very broad messages of we're the good guys, they're the bad guys, vote for us, is just not respecting the Latino diverse vote. And it's also, there are needs that are based on geography. We're a very large region and different communities are in need of different things. So I think it's really important as these local elected officials are engaging them to really dig deep in terms of what it is that is happening in those communities and engage. So I really want to speak to the sophistication of our voters. Our folks are paying attention. They're paying attention to what people said and did they deliver. The other thing that I think is important and I must highlight is that very little is invested in Latino voters. So as much as people talk about the Latino vote, when you really look at campaigns and candidates, they're not spending the dollars in order to outreach to this Latino community. So that is why, if you looked at respected conveyors of information, third on that list after teachers are community-based organizations, even higher than religious. If we go back to that slide. Why? Because many of the organizations across the region are actually going to the community, having the conversations with them, having the respect to engage them in the democratic process and also provide them with the information, the tools, sort of the guidance that they need in order for them to feel confident as voters. And so I think those are the other things that I would add to Jean's perspective on your question.
And Antonia, you were going to comment on this as well.
I think one factor that's left out is, first of all, the larger community doesn't understand us and media doesn't understand us. They don't put in the resources. They don't put on the time. It is so superficial. And you take for granted a very diverse, heterogeneous community and lump them with, certain stereotypes. And for elected officials, and I would say, very little is invested in voter registration and education and to understand our community. I mean, that's why this poll is so important, to understand the subtleties in our community. As an example, the issue of police funding. To me, that's not surprising. It coincides with the fact that Democrats, but moderate. And then the other thing about police, issues is who are the victims of a lot of the mischief? It's the poor communities, the communities that don't get the resources. So to me, the frustration is we have to deal with the fact that the mainstream community knows very little about us, and I think cares even less. We're just taken for granted. And that's something that needs to change. And, as far as, elected officials, we want honest elected officials. Yes, I would prefer a Latino, Latina, but first of all, I prefer an elected official that's going to be responsive to the needs of the local community, that's going to be there, for the community. And we have to hold our elected officials accountable. Just because you're Latino, Latina doesn't mean, you get a free ride. We have to hold them. And sometimes, in my view, we have to hold them to maybe a higher standard in the sense that they're supposed to be there. We're supposed to support them. So, having sort of monitored the political process for 45 years, I want more Latinas who will represent our community, the diversity of our community, and bring the resources that our community needs. So, right now, the mayoral election, it's interesting to me because I don't think any of them are speaking to the Latino community. And as the time gets closer, I think even less attention will be paid to the Latino community. And that is an indication of how important they see us as voters.
Jean, do you want to jump in on that? I thought
Yeah. So, I just wanted to add, the topic of discrimination that this survey really emphasized or showed how serious it is among anti-Latino discrimination among Latinos. This is like a very real issue even in a place like California, even in a place like Los Angeles. Like, we just had this recall effort that revolved around attacking the Latino community. The Republican frontrunner, Larry Elder, wanted to attack, sanctuary state policies. He wanted to scale back health insurance for undocumented communities. He was anti-science. He posed a very real threat to Latino communities. And, you saw Fox News, Tucker Carlson just maligning Latinos by using images of California, images of Los Angeles. So I just want to say all that just to underscore how I, as a columnist, have just been, following how real this threat is. This is not just, Latinos reporting discrimination. This is like a very real phenomenon. And even though Larry Elder was, defeated overwhelmingly, there's still so many, people in California who partake in that discrimination and who hold white supremacist ideologies that recently revolve around anti-Latino sentiments. And I think that our Democratic politicians, our politicians in general, need to reckon with how real that threat has become and continues to be as far as like just like endangering lives, but also rallying support for policies that would be incredibly damaging and disempowering to this community.
Thanks. Efrain, you were going to add something here.
I was, Rafe, and fully acknowledge that I'm not one of your listed panelists, so it's debating to do it.
You're part of the family.
I'm a talker. No, just, you know, and it really builds on everyone's point, but maybe something to put out with this question about candidates and getting more Latino votes, right? And some goes to something that Angelica mentioned about sophistication, and that is, you know, you're not going to build a relationship or win the broader commitment of Latino community on election day. That begins way in advance. And so we have a lot of folks that are running for office that have been in office for a long time. The questions to be asking is, you know, when did your relationship begin with Latinos? How are they incorporated into your office? Do you have staff that come from the communities that you serve? How are they working with community? Because there's a lot of, all the ingredients for the recipe that folks are trying to cook are in the survey, right? One is they trust doctors, teachers, community leaders, because those are the people that actually talk to them and serve them and ask them what they need. They, you know, they want to get engaged or don't hear as much from their elected officials. That's probably because you're not talking to them. And so I think, to Angelica's point, if we're talking about really moving the region and building a new LA, governing coalitions, right, with Latinos, if you're thinking about it 30 days out from the election, it's probably not going to yield what you think you're going to get, because you actually don't have a relationship. And to Antonia's point, Latinos are relational. They're based on trust. Are you part of the community? Do you engage in community? So
I'd ask a question as we come near the end. Frank Stoltz wrote in asking about policing issues in the election, you know, at the county level, sheriff, maybe a recall of the DA, et cetera. But we heard before that a lot of people in this community are getting their news either from Spanish language media or from both English language. And I wonder sometimes how much people in politics pay attention to the transmission of information and how issues are treated differently in the Spanish language press in terms of the priority of things. And if that would be a little helpful, because everybody gets forced into a binary position on crime and law enforcement. But doesn't this survey show a lot of subtlety about crime, law enforcement? Don't forget, a lot of people voted for Measure J, but maybe didn't favor defunding the police, but had a broader vision about reform. Angelica, what's your take on that?
So I really wanted to weigh in on this. The first piece is that what this survey shows is what many other surveys with Latino and Latinas have demonstrated, is that Latinas and Latinos, Latinx folks, the trans community, we are victims at high proportion of crime.
Mm-hmm.
And that cannot be understated. It is shameful, and especially Latinas. So I believe Hope, Hispanas Organized for Political Empowerment, did a survey with Telemundo in which they surveyed Latinas. And one of the number one issues that they are talking about is the high incidence of violence within their family. So this is domestic violence and et cetera, but also in the community that they are victims of. So many times this relationship with the police is also about the need to go to the police because you are victimized. And this is very correlated with the discrimination piece, because many times that discrimination, as we have seen at Chirla, also rises to hate crimes. So that's why this sort of situation, many times in our experience, ICE takes advantage of this. And we are actually suing the federal government on this, that many times they make themselves appear to be the police in order to, to try to elicit trust, and then use that to further enforce upon the communities. And I don't separate sort of, it's the local police and then this ICE enforcement. So our community is living in this duality, this complexity of being victims and also victims of crime, and also victims of law enforcement. Because the other thing that isn't talked about is how often Latinos are actually victimized by the police in terms of shootings and killings. And we need to speak to those issues. The other thing and the last thing I want to say is around the discrimination and immigration. Many politicians and those who are anti-Latino use the cloak of immigration in order to target Latinas. This is so important for me to say that maybe the issue of the policy itself is one thing, but the use of immigration and anti-immigrant sentiment to then be anti-Mexican, anti-Central American is very interconnected. And this is what I'm talking about, the sophistication to understand how immigration and the issue of immigration is also used to attack Latino communities, and how white people say, who is most discriminated against? They definitely point to immigrants, but then they go to us as a community connected to that. And the other thing that I think there's a lot of solidarity within Latinos, as you can see that there's a deep recognition around the discrimination against Black Americans.
Jean, do you want to, anything about this crime and violence and policing? I mean, it's in the air right now, and I wonder if this survey is going to cast some deeper light on that. I'm hoping.
Absolutely. I mean, I just feel like Angelica captured it perfectly. I agree with everything that she said, this duality that Latinos experience when it comes to police and crime. And the only thing I would add is just, I think that, our elected officials need to do a better job of understanding how Latinos often coming from mixed status families, like how that affects willingness to report crimes, to engage with police. And I think that's something that politicians in California have done a better job than in other parts of the country, but there's still so much so much trust that can be established, that needs to be established for Latinos who so often come from mixed status families to feel like they can report and engage with the police.
Thank you, Jean. Antonia, what's your takeaway from this day, from this discussion, as we wrap it up? What does it leave you with?
Well, it leaves me with a sense that a hope and more like an expectation that people will take these results seriously, that they will seek to try to understand our community in a nuanced way. And what Angelica said and what Jean said as far as the police, we are victims, and yet we're afraid of law enforcement because they have not been responsive to us. They don't understand us. And so, and many immigrants come from countries where law enforcement is not controlled. So that as victims, you want to be able to trust the police, to trust government. That's why, the results show that the lack of trust in government is very low, because you cannot rely on that. And, the police is also part of the problem. And Angelica's right. You say La Migra, you say the police, there's no difference. And that's why for years we have fought to separate local law enforcement from federal law enforcement. So I think for me here's the information. And that's why CCF, is part of supporting these polls, to provide the information for the larger community. And at the end of the day, Ray, what the public needs to understand, we're over 50% of the population. We're not this silent minority. How we think, the hope that we have for this country is the hope of the future of the region. And so for politicians and the public to better understand us, it's not please understand me. It's in your self-interest for you to understand this community and to serve this community, because we are the future. And I think that that's the most important thing for me as a takeaway as part of this survey.
Thank you, Antonia. I would like to thank this wonderful panel. And if you've been looking at the chat, You've inspired everybody who's been watching. So Antonia, Angelica, Jean, Ephraim, thank you for joining in on this. It was great to have you. I want to thank CCF and their wonderful staff, the PBI staff, BSP and their staff, and everybody who has helped make this work, and thank all the members of the media who have shown so much interest in this and digging into this data. You can find Matt's slides, and a special thank to Matt for a great presentation. His slides are available on our website. It's posted up there in the chat. We'll be able to share more information about the survey in the current days. But thank you all, and thank you for everybody who attended. And let's all be very hopeful for the future and have a great day. Thank you all, everybody.